In 1979, when the stress reduction clinic was birthed at the University of Massachusetts Medical Center, it was really the first time, as far as I know, that mindfulness as a rigorous discipline was brought into the mainstream of medicine and healthcare. And I knew when I started the program, and again, having been trained as a scientist, that if we didn't actually try to document what was going on, it would be a nice anecdotal story about some hospital that had an interesting program, and that would be it, because it's only one hospital. And with no data, it's like people hear it, they believe it, they tell stories about it, but it doesn't go anywhere. And so if the intention was to actually have this move the bell curve of medicine and public health, we needed to write scientific papers documenting in the medical and scientific literature what was going on. And so you can see in this chart the number of peer-reviewed scientific papers that come out in the medical literature every year. In 1982, it was one paper, the first paper I published on chronic pain patients. And then all of a sudden, around the year 2000, 2002, things start to go up higher and higher and higher. Now there are 1,203 papers in the last complete year that we have data for, which was 2019. The shape of this curve is exponential. It's growing faster and faster and faster. But the fact of this is that in less than 20 years, a field has developed, an entire field, not just in psychology and in medicine and healthcare, but also in neuroscience, looking at all these deeper aspects of what's going on in the brain, what's going on in the immune system, what's going on with our chromosomes and, epigenetics and telomeres at the ends of the chromosomes, cell senescence and cell aging. So this is kind of evidence, and one of the reasons I like to talk about it is that it's evidence that it is actually possible to bring new things into the world in ways that are really grounded in scientific investigations and it's kind of attempts to deeply understand how the mind and the body and meditation practice are related to health across the lifespan. And so I think there's enormous cause for optimism as this research continues to develop, that we'll understand in deeper and deeper ways why it is that something as simple as, from the outside, nothing at all, can have such profound effects on the organism. Alyssa Epel and her colleague Liz Blackburn, who won the Nobel Prize for some of her work with telomeres and the enzyme that makes them longer or shorter, telomerase. Now, telomeres are the repeat subunits of DNA at the end of all of our chromosomes. And it turns out they're necessary for mitosis, for cell division. But those mitotic spindles have these telomeres associated with them that are degradable. Every time the cell divides, they get shorter. And when they're gone, then the cell goes into what's called senescence and basically dies. So the research by these two scientists demonstrated that when people were in unavoidable high-stress situations, the longer this went on, the shorter their telomeres got, which basically means that stress promotes cell deterioration and accelerates the aging process. So very often when we say, wow, that experience took years off my life, this is biological evidence that actually it's not just a metaphor, that it's actually true, because the telomeres get shortened. But there was one thing that differentiated between whether they really got shortened severely or there was some kind of protection from them being shortened. And that element was whether you felt that you could cope with the circumstances or not. So if you felt positive about your ability to handle that level of stress, your telomeres did not degrade at the same rate as that if you felt like you were up against it all and you had no resources to deal with it. So this is a psychological factor that an emotional factor that is actually having an effect on the chemistry of your cell division, that psychological factors that have to do with how you are in relationship to the stress makes all the difference. So this factor of believing in your own robustness, and that you can at least turn towards and work with what's workable, or experiment, play with what's possible. There's a lot of evidence that that is actually a profound human attribute or skill that is developable, that actually tilts us towards being optimally healthy. So this is kind of, I feel, an extremely remarkable paper that was published by Norman Farb and his colleagues and Zindel Siegel at the University of Toronto back in 2007. I think it's a really seminal study. And I'm going to sort of give you a kind of impressionistic sense of this, so not give you a whole lot of details, because it's actually a very complex protocol. But it involves fMRI scanners. And the idea was that they would look at a region of the brain that has to do with what's called the default mode network. It turns out if you take somebody and stick them into an fMRI scanner, which looks like a long cigar tube where you have to be, completely confined and not move while they're scanning your brain, and you tell them, just don't do anything, just lie there. Like, what could you do anyway? I mean, there's not much to do. But they say, just don't do anything special. Don't meditate, just lie there. It turns out that when you do that, they see a large network in the sort of medial region of the frontal cortex, this whole region just light up like crazy. And they call it the default mode network because when you're told not to do anything and just lie there, you default to, what do you default to? Well, you default to thinking. And you default to thinking about your favorite subject. And what could your favorite subject possibly be? Me, of course. Moi-même, myself. So we start to think about the past, the future. We just go into endless rumination about me and my story. The story of me, starring me, and how wonderful it is or how horrible it is. So this is the kind of default mode network. And you see lots of activity in this region. So they took people and they put them in the fMRI scanner after they were randomized, and they found that both groups looked the same. Then half of them went through the 8-week MBSR program. The other half were just wait list controlled. And then they put them in the scanner again. And what they found was that the people who had gone through the 8 weeks of MBSR, their brain scans were actually quite different. And so there was attenuation in this default mode network. There was certainly still activity there, but there was also activity in this new network. And they called this new network the experiential network. So they were actually in the present moment practicing. They were not told to meditate or anything like that, but they were actually simply being in the scanner without defaulting to all of the activity in this network. And whereas in the control group, there was no difference between, there was nothing here, and this was just, the default mode was just going full speed. So this suggests that when you actually practice what looks a lot from the outside like nothing, non-doing, and without striving or attending to get any kind of result whatsoever, you're featuring the narrative story of me, starring me in the great movie of my life, or the horrible, catastrophic movie of my life. This kind of calms down after 8 weeks of instruction in MBSR. And this area of the brain lights up that allows you to just be, because it's just what's happening. It's not how do you feel in relationship to what's happening? It's just what's happening. So you could be at peace with it. As long as I'm in the scanner, I might as well just be in the scanner. It's not just the brain and neuroplasticity and these kind of neuroplastic changes. This new field of epigenetics has shown that our genes are being upregulated and downregulated by the thousands, or at least by the multiple hundreds, all through the day and night. And a lot of the genes that respond to meditation practice and either upregulate or downregulate are not random genes. They're genes that have to do with inflammation in the body. And inflammation nowadays is thought of as the root cause of a lot of our chronic illnesses. Richie Davidson, an old and close friend and colleague at the University of Wisconsin many years ago, compared MBSR with a highly refined control group called HEP, Health Enhancement Program, that mirrored MBSR in every dimension except for the mindfulness itself. So what they did was they took people and injected capsaicin under the skin, which is the active ingredient in hot chili peppers. And what they found after 8 weeks of MBSR was that nobody changed compared to the control group in all the self-report measures. But the people in the MBSR group showed a much quicker and more robust reduction in the immune response to the capsaicin injection than the people who were getting that highly defined HEP control that had no mindfulness practice in it. So again, there's an indication at least that the meditation practice is actually doing something that all the other things in the MBSR program that they were controlling for is not doing, and that is changing your biology. Whether it's your telomeres, inflammatory responses, or whatever, that somehow this changes all sorts of biological regulation in really, really interesting ways.